Hi guys, it's Annie. Welcome back to BloomTV. Today I am going to do a Victorian historical recommendations video because I thought I'd like to do another recommendations video, and historical is such a broad genre, and Victorian historical fiction is one of my favourite kind of subgenres of historical fiction to read. So I have a lot of recommendations here which I think are quite varied, and I've got quite a few different options. So I hope you find something in this video that you like. And yes, I'm actually back for a long time now. I have finished all my exams as of a couple of hours ago, and so you're gonna see a lot more videos hopefully in the future because I now am off school for 2.5 weeks before going back for a month, before then going on my full summer holidays. So anyway, rambling story aside, here are my Victorian fiction recommendations. And I have some classics here, and the first one is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. And this is actually from the Victorian Edwardian period. Yeah, in just one note, these are going to cover Victorian and early Edwardian period. Just saying as a quick note. This is one of my favourite classics. I really enjoyed this. If you don't maybe want to read the book but you're interested in the story, I'd really recommend the most recent BBC miniseries adaptation with Douglas Booth and Ray Winstone in it, because that's a really great adaptation with beautiful cinematography. So if you don't perhaps want to read the book but want to know the story, I'd really recommend that. But this is a great classic. It's a story about finding out who you are, greed, wealth, love, and it's got some of the best. I always find with Charles Dickens books that the names are brilliant, and this has got some of my favourite characters in it. And aside from Jane Austen books, I'd have to say this is one of my favourite classics. So I'd really recommend this, and it's not too long, it's not Les Miserables length, so it's not too awful and, you know, long and tedious. The next two books I have are by the same author, and they're children's classics, and it is The Little Princess and The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. And these are brilliant books. They're children's books, but I wouldn't say you couldn't read them just because you're not a child. They're also classics from that Victorian Edwardian period, and A Little Princess focuses on Sarah Crewe, who, if I remember rightly, is sent to England to boarding school. Yes, I haven't read this one in a long time, but this also has a film, which is brilliant. And the second one is The Secret Garden, and this is about Mary, and her parents both die in an epidemic in India, so she is sent to live with her uncle in England, in kind of northern England, I think. And there's a lot of secrets there, and she finds this garden, this secret garden, by finding a key. And both books have quite elements of secrecy to them, and they both have really interesting child heroines, which I really enjoy. And although I read this one when I was about 8 and A Little Princess when I was maybe 10, I would really recommend them for any age, just because they're really wonderful stories. And yes, I really enjoy both of them. And they both have films produced, I think, in around late 90s, which are really good. And I've watched quite a few times. I'm not afraid to admit that. And the next two books I have are also by the same author, and they are The Quietness and The Madness by Alison Rattle. And I hadn't really heard of her until I saw The Quietness last summer in, I think it was W.H. Smith or somewhere, and I just kind of picked it up as oh, sounds interesting, but I've got more things that I kind of want to read. And recently I saw it in my library and I was oh, I'll read that. And I also, a couple of weeks ago, had bought The Madness by Alison Rattle, so I was oh, I can read them together. And they're both set in the Victorian times, and I have to say I haven't read The Madness yet, but it is something I'm planning on reading the next couple of weeks. But I have just read The Quietness yesterday, and it was really good. I wasn't really expecting, I hadn't really heard anything about them, but I just kind of picked them up because they were set in the Victorian genre, Victorian era. And this one follows two girls, Queenie and Ellen. And Ellen lives a very secluded existence with her mother and father, and she's not allowed to go out very much, and she hates living where she is, whereas Queenie lives in the slums of London, and she goes out to work with her father, but she also hates it and wants to just get away. So Queenie finds a job with two women who say that they look after pregnant women, like fallen women at this time, and who come and have their babies with them and then leave their babies behind, and the babies get taken in by families in the country. Ellen then encounters Queenie in some way. I'm not going to tell you because it will be a spoiler. And it's about their growing friendship and the consequences of others' actions. And this is just such a great book about friendship. I think in YA we always expect there to be some romance, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm always really interested in invested in romance plots in books, but I kind of recently think they're not always necessary, and sometimes books with just pure friendship relationships are really nice and just good books to read. So I would really recommend this, and it also deals with like darker issues like abortion and sexism at that time, and like attitudes towards women and specifically fallen women. And it's just a really good book, and I would really recommend this because I think it is quite historically accurate. It's based on a true story. Then the second book, which is the one I haven't read, which is by the same author, is about a young girl called Marnie, who lives at the seaside. And of course, in the Victorian times, sea cures were seen as like a really important cure for illnesses. And she works there with her mum, and she falls in love with this boy, and I think the love is unreciprocated or something along that way, but I don't really know too much about it, but I'm really looking forward to reading it. I think it's about, kind of says, a completely engrossing story of love gone wrong, and I just think that sounds, again, really interesting. So yes, I'd recommend this, and this has such, both these books have really beautiful covers, like, oh, that's just so beautiful. Not that it has any influencing factor upon the story, but anyway, then the next books is a trilogy, and I think you kind of know what it is, and it is the Infernal Devices trilogy by Cassandra Clare, featuring Clockwork Angel, Clockwork Prince and Clockwork Princess. I think these are showing up backwards to you guys, but this is one of my favourite series of all times. I love the Shadowhunter Chronicles that Cassandra Clare writes. I'm actually going to see her on Saturday, and oh my gosh, I'm so excited. And these books are set in Victorian London, but they have a more paranormal and fantasy element to them. So if you kind of like that, but you're interested in reading Victorian London, I would recommend these. And I don't really read steampunk books, but a lot of people describe these as steampunk, but it's not really a genre that I'm familiar with, so I can't really say anything about that. But the characters, I always find Cassandra Clare writes such brilliant characters, and characters with really nice relationships which you really enjoy reading about. That's one of my main favourite parts about reading her books. And they're always action-packed, and I think just with the Infernal Devices, the whole setting of it made it so much more enjoyable for me than the Mortal Instruments. But I'm not going to ramble about these any longer because I've talked about these like in every video on this channel. So, and they are very hyped, so it's not too much long to know about them. And then the final book I have is also something with kind of magical elements, and it's Elijah's Mermaid by S.C. Fox. And this is again set in Victorian London, and it's about two twins, Elijah and, oh my gosh, Elijah and Lily, yes. You know, when you have that mental block, and they are twins and they grow up in the countryside, but when they reach the age of 17 they go to London and they meet this girl called Pearl, who's grown up in a brothel. And Pearl has webbed toes, and she kind of has this very like mythical, magical kind of aura, I guess, surrounding her. But this is such a good book. I'd say it's actually kind of similar to The Quietness, because it just deals with those darker issues of like how women were treated in Victorian times, like put into asylums to be controlled really by their husbands and fathers and their families. And this does deal with that in quite, there is one, I'm just going to warn you now, there is one section in here which is quite graphically detailed, which I hate reading stuff like that. So yes, warning, but don't let it stop you reading the book. Just skip to the next chapter, because that's what I did and I was fine. And yeah, I just really recommend this to everyone really, not even if you're not interested in Victorian London. It's just such a brilliant book and the writing is beautiful, and I actually can't wait to read more of Essie Fox's books because in this book the writing is just so beautiful and I just adore it. So yes, those are all my Victorian genre recommendations. Let me know in the down below if you've got any Victorian historical recommendations for me, because as I just said, they are my favourite subgenre of historical fiction to read about. So yes, let me know in the comments and let me know if you've read any of these and if you liked them or disliked them. Yes, just leave a comment. I love reading them and replying to them. And also, yeah, I'll see you soon. Bye!